terrible to say, but there is a template for investigating disasters like this one. We have Challenger to look back on and to learn from. Back then, President Ronald Reagan called for an independent commission, 13 distinguished people from different backgrounds. It was known as the Rogers Commission for former Secretary of State William Rogers, who led the hearings. They conducted 160 interviews, 35 investigative sessions, and poured through 63,000 documents and pictures. And one more number. They had 120 days to come up with the cause. It didn't take long to zero in on one single factor, the effect that cold weather that day had on the O-ring joints. Rarely in such a complex situation do you get the sort of gotcha moment. But this investigation had it in a demonstration by the renowned physicist Richard Feynman.
Oh, I took this stuff that I got out of your seal and I put it in ice water. And I discovered that when you put some pressure on it for a while and then undo it, it maintains, it doesn't stretch back, it stays the same dimension. In other words, for a few seconds at least, and more seconds than that, there's no resilience in this particular material when it's at a temperature of 32 degrees. I believe that has some significance for our problem.
Had a lot of significance. We should add that President Bush himself has not called for a commission, as John King reported a few moments ago. Today, on the editorial pages of the New York Times, a suggestion that given the success of the Rogers Commission, the president should at least consider it. Rogers Commission had 120 days. We've had less than 4, and we can't stress enough, despite how much information has come out, we stick with what we know and resist speculation. We don't worry about that where our next guest is concerned, Jeffrey Kluger. He's pieced together the facts we have now for this week's Time magazine. He's also the co-author of the definitive account of Apollo 13, that successful failure, as they call it, a book called Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13. He joins us from New York. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
What's the most surprising piece of information that you've heard in the last couple of days?
I think the most surprising piece of information is one that we've heard a great deal, which is that we have, it seems, the smoking gun even before a commission convenes. It's a bit of good fortune in all this ill fortune that we've seen this piece of foam break off of the external tank, that there's footage that accounts for it, and that all of the evidence so far is consistent with that having done it, without having been responsible. Now, that said, there is some history for counterintuitive things causing problems. Nobody thought of O-rings in 1986. When TWA Flight 800 exploded in 1996, nobody thought that a center fuel tank explosion could be responsible for it. In fact, the thinking at the time was that yes, it's possible, but it would be the first time in the history of commercial aviation that it happened, and yet it did happen. So in this case, we shouldn't rush to judgment, but I think we should be grateful that we seem to have what could be the definitive agent responsible for this.
I suspect, Jeffrey, that when a lot of us first heard of this, our first impulse, it may have been fleeting, but our first impulse was terrorism. You're someone who has covered this a long time. What was your first impulse?
My first impulse was aging shuttle fleet and statistical inevitability. Terrorism after September 11th occurred to everybody, of course, and it occurred to me as well. But the two possibilities, the two ways it could be done, either through a shoulder-launched missile or some bomb being slipped aboard the spacecraft, were such long shots that I was happy that it didn't merit serious attention, and even in the more sensationalist elements of the media, it hasn't gotten sincere attention. I do think that the space shuttle has always been, while a magnificent piece of engineering, a very temperamental piece of engineering, I think risk analysis has always said that you would have accidents with this kind of vehicle in 1 in about every 100 flights. And also keep in mind the vehicles are flying longer than they were intended to. They were originally meant to fly 100 flights, but to do it in just a handful of years. Columbia's been around for 22 years and has only flown 28 times. A lot of fatigue gets built up in a spacecraft over that period of time, and it's not surprising that another one, especially the oldest one, has now been claimed by an accident.
And weigh in on, because it's one of those things that in these moments everyone talks about, everyone here, everyone in Congress, everyone says corners weren't cut where safety is concerned. But was there some corner cutting to make budget or at least delaying upgrades when upgrades were called for?
I think it's possible that there was some delaying of upgrades, but for all the hits NASA has taken, some deserved, some not so deserved over the years, the kind of attention, I've been in the orbiter processing facility in Florida, and I've seen the kind of meticulous attention that's paid to maintaining these spacecrafts. I've seen the heat lamps trained on one tile at a time until they've properly annealed, until they've properly enamelized onto the surface of the spacecraft. And I think that NASA has done the very best it can within the budgetary limitations it's had. There's always been friction between engineering and politics with this craft. The shuttle, when first conceived, was supposed to be a single-stage to orbit craft. There would have been no solid boosters. There would have been no external tank. Without solid boosters, we never would have had Challenger. So I think NASA has come up against the hard realities of money, but I believe that at least in terms of safety, it's done the very best it could within those limitations.
Jeffrey, thanks for your expertise and your time tonight. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we continue looking at the Shuttle Columbia story from here in Houston as the hour goes on. But after the break, we'll check out some of the other stories that made news today, including the murder arrest of famous record producer Phil Spector. From Houston, Texas, this is Newsnight on CNN. Back to the shuttle investigation. We should make that investigations plural. 3 broad inquiries with a number of others in the works are gearing up. Representative Sherwood Bohlert's House Committee has oversight responsibility for NASA. It's conducting one of those investigations. The Congressman joins us tonight from Washington. Nice to have you with us, sir. I know you've heard these questions before, but one of your colleagues, Jim Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin, said to us last night that he did think Congress bore some responsibility, at least in this regard, that the shuttle budget and gets all mixed up with the space station budget, and the space station budget has been a black hole. Do you agree with that, that at least the space station has been sucking money out of the program?
Well, the space station has been over budget, and it's taken a disproportionate share of the budget, but I don't think that's caused sacrificing with the shuttle program.
Do you think they're just separate problems or separate situations? And so
I do indeed.
Okay. Where do you go here? Obviously, there are a lot of facts to gather, but a lot of facts have come out. Do you get the feeling that you have a fairly decent idea of what might have happened?
Well, we're not going to jump to any conclusions, nor should we, and we're not going to rule out any options. We had a meeting this afternoon with Administrator O'Keefe, the congressional leadership, and the leaders of the committees of jurisdiction, and he took us through step by step the procedure and where we're going from here. For our sake, the House Science Committee, we have scheduled on February 27th a hearing to begin the process of reauthorizing NASA's budget. But now, obviously, the scope of that is going to be expanded.
Do you believe that this tragedy will require the country to think very hard about investing in a new upgraded vehicle if manned spaceflight remains a priority?
Well, I think this investigation is going to prompt Americans to think long and hard about a lot of things, but they should have no illusions. We're not going to have a quick answer, but we're going to continue the space program. It's critically important. It's so much more than the shuttle program.
Well, it's one thing, of course, to continue the space program. It's another thing to continue the manned part of the space program, which is very expensive because of all the redundancies and safety that has to be built in. If we're going to continue manned space flight, should we be continuing it in the shuttle?
Well, that's one of the options we're going to look at. We're going to examine it very carefully, but only in light of a very thorough, very comprehensive investigation. We owe that to the families of the Columbia crew, and we owe that to their memory. It's going to be a very thorough, very comprehensive investigation. But keep in mind, the space shuttle program This is the first accident in the 42-year history of the overall space program on re-entry. Unfortunately, we've just had one previous accident, and that was the Challenger back in '86. But the fact of the matter is human space flight, which is something I support, has provided wonderful results, not just for the United States, but for all mankind. Whether or not we continue it is an open question, but I favor it, and I think we will conclude that we should continue it.
Congressman, it's a good note to leave on. We'll see how these hearings go. I think those of us who've grown up with the program are extraordinarily interested in what you all learned. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.